Good morning, Renaissance artists. I am happy to welcome you back today to my studio, and I have this really fun project. I think we're going to enjoy watercolor painting these little pigs. I'm going to give you here a tutorial on when you take a photograph, how to break it down into the logical step-by-step procedure of taking an image and sort of intellectualizing how you're going to do that with watercolor, because you have to work sort of from the background to the foreground. So we leave the white of the paper white, and then we work from the next lightest light, and we paint that. And then we working our way gradually towards the darkest darks, and we paint those last. So what we're going to do in this is I'm going to show you the picture here of the little pigs, and then what choices that I've made to select and leave out extra information that isn't really pertaining to what it is I really want to convey with this painting. And then also the step-by-step how I would approach it, the choices that I'm making in the washes that I start with, and so forth. So I'm going to cut away and do that. All right, when breaking down a photograph that you really enjoyed, there are a few things you want to work on. The first thing you want to do is to subtract unnecessary elements of the photo that are not going to contribute to your plan. And the next thing you want to do is to break down the values and start with your lightest lights in the background first. And in this case, it's the hay and the lightest tones of the hay. And then I will work on the pigs and start working from the lightest tones to the darker tones, which would be the black spots at the very end. So really it's broken down into two steps: simplify and determine your values, light to dark. Okay, so I hope that that was helpful. Let's get going and we'll do exactly what we just said there. So to begin with, I have my drawing on my watercolor paper and I've taped it off, as you've seen. And then I've kept the tracing paper over the top of it just for storage. When I'm not working on it, I can just lay it, once it's dry, I can lay it back over to protect the watercolor when it's not being worked on. And I also can double check too to see if my drawing has in any way become awry while working on it. So this is how I would typically begin any sort of watercolor painting, is I draw it on very lightly with a 4H or some such H pencil. And I'll give myself as much information as I feel is necessary given the subject matter. And so what I did with this is I used all of my typical cross-hatching and using the lines to show form on theirs, just so that while I'm painting, I don't have to do a lot of that thinking because it's already done for me there. And I also mapped out where my values and my shadows are going to go and how I want those all sort of connected. These nice darks all connected this way and all that. So I'm going to get going now. Alright, so I have my nice puddle mixed up here, and it's pretty big too. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger, and I'm just taking both the yellow ochre and cad yellow. Let's add some more water to that. Now what you can do is when you're going to cover a large area with a wash, I will scrape the paint out of my brush, clean it off, and just do clear water over the whole thing. There's still a little bit of yellow in there, but that's okay. Just taking clear over the whole thing. I don't really mind that it's a little bit tainted in pigment, that way you can kind of see what I'm doing. While it's still wet, to get a nice flat wash over a large area, I'm going to drag that down. It's the same thing as practicing washes. We're just going very much larger. Dragging that down. Alright, wipe the brush off. If there's any puddle down here to mix up or to wipe up, we're going to do that now. Alright, so I'm going to let that dry. I had decided that while it was still wet, that I wanted it a little bit lighter. So while it was wet, I took some clear water over the whole painting and just brushed it down, and that lightened that entire background. And I thought that I would keep this in the video because it shows you that if you get it while it's still wet, watercolor can be a little bit workable. It's not as entirely unforgiving as we think sometimes. Now at this point, if there's anything that you want a little bit whiter and brighter than what you painted it, you can grab a very short stubby brush, and I use these cheap synthetic ones for this. Just get it wet, dry it off a little bit, and you can use it to rub out areas where you want it brighter white. And I'd want it much brighter on his little face right up front here, and on his ears over here, along the side of his face. You can see how by just rubbing it a little bit like this, it lifts out some of the paint. If you don't clean, you have to clean your brush off every once in a while and kind of start over, rubbing that. But I like these little ones for this because you can get a more chiseled edge as you're rubbing that out. Let's get his little nose over here. Wipe, wipe, wipe. And this ear. Okay, I think the rest of this is pretty good to let be a little softer. Okay, that works. Now we're gonna let it dry. Okay, now if you're not sure if it's dry, you can always look to the side, like I'm looking at it this way, and if you can see that it's still shiny, it's obviously still wet, but I'm looking at it and it looks pretty dry, so I'm gonna touch it with the back of my finger and we're good to go. It feels a little cold, but that's okay. So now I'm looking at the picture, and I do want to work from the background to the foreground, just like with any picture. And I'm looking at the pigs, and I know that there's blacks and other colors in here that I'll want to play with soon. But I'm seeing some yellows and shades in the straw that I really want to try to catch. So I am going to use my sable brush, getting it to a nice sharp point. I'm going to get some yellow, cad yellow medium. You can grab some yellow ochre. And right now we're just going to start putting in some little scratches for the straw. I don't want it to be super noticeable, so we don't want it really bright, but just a suggestion of straw. And so it's a little bit of dry brushing, a little bit. We're going to add shadow over the top of this in a little bit. So again, we're working in layers. So just scratching in some little shadows. Oops, I have paint on my hand. So for now, we're just kind of laying in some straw. And I don't want to fill it in solid. Let's just let some of those white or lighter patches peek through, because those are the little pieces of highlight on the straw. And we're going to work in these in a few layers too, so we'll be playing with a few more colors in all this. Little lines. What these are essentially are just teeny little washes, but they're sideways. See, by laying down that first wash that was a soft ochre tone, that sort of set the stage for some of this straw in here, which made sense. And I was told that these little pigs are the kind that people keep as pets, so that's kind of nice to know. And so here we're going over this way. I'm moving towards the light. It's coming from this direction, so I am going to make my wash, my yellow wash, a little bit lighter as we move to that area. I just don't want it as dark over here in the sun. So just like that. I think that feels like straw. You don't have to go crazy. I would just kind of keep it around the pigs in this whole area. I'll let it just kind of fade back this way. We really don't need it going much beyond that. I think that works. I also, as I mentioned before, chose not to put the mother pig in the background. I just thought it was more information than it's necessary. All right, so now I'm going to take some burnt sienna right into my yellow mixture here. And I woke up all the colors earlier. I'd put water in every one of these. So I'm going to work in layers, and it doesn't matter to me if this is still wet or dry, because I think it'd be interesting to have some of these colors just sort of blend. So if I get some on the paint, some on the pig, I just kind of wipe it off with my finger. Letting some of the yellow peek through. Of course, this area over here is going to be a little bit more shaded, so I don't mind that we have a little bit more sienna over here, and I'll do less on this side. Just again, rebuilding that focus of sunshine on the straw. Little piggy's first day out. I guess they're probably more than a day old. But you can call your painting Little Piggy's First Day Out. Sounds really cute. And I'm trying also to keep, even though these are little teeny washes, I'm trying to keep them fresh, and they are actually fairly juicy little puddles of paint, and I don't want them to be overworked, so just letting them sort of intermingle and just sort of live on the paper. I don't know if I mentioned it, but this is 300-pound hot pressed Arches watercolor block. So as I'm moving over here, I'm going to let more of those yellows just sort of peek through more. So just a real subtle. I know that you may be thinking, well, I'm working on the background here, but don't the pigs have areas on their little bodies that are lighter than this sienna and the shadows? They do, but what I want to do is not get to the pigs until I'm done with the background. So I'm just going to suggest that. And you can already start to see how there's this movement of dark to light across here. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to get the shadows under the pigs. So I'm going to grab some ultramarine blue, and I'm going to just right into this area here get some burnt sienna. This is my shadow color. We're going to use more of this as we get going. So these are the shadows under the pigs, and they go back this way. Again, I'm just letting them mix with that ochre color. Picking up more. And then his head sort of creates a little shadow down here. Alright, what I want to do now is, because I got into the legs and stuff here, I'm going to show you how forgiving watercolor can be. So if you work quickly, then you come back in here with your stubby sort of eraser type brush. You can get it wet, clean it off, and erase away some of your mistakes like that. As long as it's still slightly damp, and I've even done it fairly dry too, if you rub a little bit there without like really damaging the surface of the paper, you can erase just a little bit there. And over here. I'm just cleaning up over these edges over here, and the front legs, just the legs a little bit there. Let's get some of that straw kind of coming up the legs too. And back here. Okay, and I think that that works to do a nice suggested bed of straw. I do want to get this little patch in between his legs back here. Like that. Okay, so there we have the foundation, and now we're going to work on the pigs and pulling forward. I might even, when it's all said and done, come back under here and punch that up a little bit darker. So now I'm looking at the pigs and I'm working from the lightest to the darkest, and of course I'm going to leave the white of the paper areas where I wanted that light, and some of these areas where I didn't rub out, but I still needed the light of the paper. I'm just going to work around those. So to do that, as I'm looking at the picture of the pigs, I feel that the next lightest light is the pinks on their face and their nose. So to do a pink, I'm going to grab some of my cadmium red. Let's get a nice puddle there. A little bit of yellow. And you can test it on your test paper. I think that that's pretty good. So I'm just going to paint right on the nose, a little wash. And let's get above the nose a little bit too, wiping that off because it's pretty dark. If you just wipe your brush off, you can kind of get a lighter tone. And because basically what you've done is you've eliminated more of that color and pigment. And I'm going to drag that down to his chin too. Alright, let's do the other side, the other one. And again, we're going to kind of start at the top of the nose and go down the front. Like that. Oops. Wipe it off. Alright, so I'm feeling good about that. And I think, yeah, there really isn't anything in the ears. So that about wraps up their noses. Let's do a little bit darker. We'll get some rose madder, maybe a little bit of yellow ochre, just for a little darker spots inside the nostrils. Get the other side. Alright, now I'm going to kind of clean that up a little. Damage control! Yeah, that looks cute. So what I'm going to do here when I'm all done is I'll come back through and add just a few highlights. Alright, now I'm going to use some of this color that I have mixed up for the hay, or the straw. It's sort of a warm gray. And I'm going to use this to paint just on the areas where on the white of their bodies, it's a little bit darker than what I have here. So I'll wipe that off. It's a little too dark. We're just going to sort of dry brush it actually, which means there's not much water on your brush, but you just lay that down. And I want that sort of scratchy look a little bit on their back because it looks like pig hair. If you go a little bit scratchy there. Coming down around the side here. Wipe that off, it's too dark. I want that a little bit lighter than what I have. Okay, and then on the shadow on the front leg here, we're going to let the highlight do its thing there. So we'll leave that alone. And then on this side, shadow. Same thing with this pig. I'm bringing that wash down. Wipe the brush off. We're going to kind of blend this into the light. Same with this leg. Okay. Looking like pigs. Piggies. Alright, so now there's a few little places on their heads that have this little bit darker white wash. Cleaning my brush off, I just want to... You get it wet and you clean it off and then you drag that down, just like you did the gradating washes. You start with the darker color at the top and then you rinse it off, wipe it, and drag a clear puddle down, like that. The same thing with over here. Oops. Wipe it off. And always be looking back and checking your reference. Wipe that off. Okay, now we're going to, oops, I want to blend this a little bit more. Alright, now we're going to do this one. Again, using a little bit of that puddle that we had over here. He's got his little spots on top of his head that are a little darker. You can wipe it and do that, rub a little bit off. The tip of his ear is kind of darker. Wipe it, rub that down. And then we have more of that on his face too. Or maybe this is Flossie. Maybe she's a girl. She seems a little shyer. I think she's Flossie. So we'll do that. There you go, little girl. Okay, so there's that. Oh, we've got a little darker spot back there. All right, so if you've noticed, I'm keeping my finger off my hand from resting on the paper. I don't want to do that. Resting my pinky on the tape on the edge, and then just working little washes that way. It's a very light colored mixture. There's a lot of water here, so it's not really getting out of control on me. What I want to do now is mix up a little bit darker gray, just a little bit. Burnt sienna, ultramarine blue, being two complementary colors. Maybe a little bit more brown. Okay, so let's check that. It looks pretty green, and I don't want it that green, so I'm going to just kind of start this whole puddle over down here. It's picking up a lot of that yellow ochre, and I don't want it to do that. So down here, if I mix it, oh, see, that's already better. There we go. A little more blue will turn it more gray. See the difference there? That's pretty interesting. All right, check that. Yep, that's great. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to work on the black spots on the little pigs. So this is the first coat, and it's dry, so I'm good to go. So this is going over all of whatever is a black spot, and this is not the final color that I'm going to put on the spots either. Wiping that off because I do not like this sharp edge here. I want the separation here between the black spots and the white spots to be softer. I don't want it to look like cow spots where they're like clean, sharp, strong edges. Just nice fuzzy little edge breakups there are good. Dragging this wash down. Get down to the bottom. We're going to let that just sort of get lost in the straw right down here. Just like that. Right, and his back leg is back there, so we'll just paint that in quick. Nice little wash. Wipe the brush off. Coming back up in here, he's just got a few spots on his belly and back, so we'll get these in. Now again, we have a strong, sharp line there, and I don't like that, so I'll come back through here. And again, I'm keeping my brush strokes to show the form. So we'll soften those. Wipe, wipe, wipe. And on his back. And over here, a little spot. Okay. Oops, wrong color. Clean my brush off, soften these edges. All right. Now I'm going to get some more of these spots that are around and behind his head. And then up and around the ear. Now, this is the first layer of black. Just grays, basically. So it doesn't really matter to me whether I started with this one or this one first. But as you can see, these, they're not really juicy little puddles. They're just almost, it's almost like coloring with colored pencils that are sort of juicy. So that's okay. I want this gray to be a little lighter than what I'm using, so I'll just take a clear wash of water over that to soften and lighten that. I don't want that to look like sort of a hair piece, so we're just going to soften that edge right there. And get this little ear patch, it comes down around the side of the face over here, and down the front, oops, again, I need to wipe up that puddle. Down this front leg. And the eye. This side of the eye over here has this lighter wash, gray. Okay, and a little spot of dark on the nose. Okay, so that's all that really needs to happen for that right now. Okay, so I'm going to mix up another puddle and do the one behind it. That's a nice gray. Maybe a little bit blue. I think that's okay for the highlight though. Alright, again, just painting these spots. Okay, so I do not like those strong breaks. Softening those just by wiping the brush off. Kind of letting it be dry and just moving it around a bit while it's still a little bit damp. Okay. And this dark area comes around behind the ear. Again, it's just an interesting little area to do the wash, just dragging that down, which will frame the side of this front piggy's face quite nicely, to have that dark area right next to it. I want some of this to have a little bit more scratchy quality here. Softer edge where the dark meets the light. Okay, now we have this other wash behind his ear that's a larger area, so we'll just paint all of that in. Dragging that down. And then I'm going to soften that edge of that wash. Rinse, wipe, and then with a dry, clean brush, mostly dry, that's fine, you just soften that edge. And you can make it look like hair by just sort of scratching it that way a little bit. There. Alright, let's clean this shape of this puddle up a little bit. Comes around his cheek. So her cheek, we decided this was Flossie. So that just shows the side plane of the face, and then inside the ear. On the top of the head. Well, the neck here is dark, but there's a couple of little spots right on the top that were so cute. So we'll let those do the thing. Most of her face is quite dark. So we'll just, and there's one white spot in the middle of her forehead, so we'll leave that light, the light of the paper. And especially since we're doing, you know, pig fur, it's nice to use this kind of brushwork, just dry brushing, where it's almost like coloring, just like I said. So the spot comes down on this side, a little bit more. Comes under her eye a little bit. And then we're going to come up and over the nose, just on this shadowed side. Wipe. I want this a little lighter in here. There we go. Okay, so now we don't have any spots on their legs really here, so we'll just kind of leave those alone. All right, now I'm going to come back through and just get some of the darker areas nice and stronger. So grabbing some more ultramarine blue and more burnt sienna. And you'll notice I don't have very much water on here. That's because I want it a little darker here. I want to make sure that I didn't get that too dark, so I'll check. Because I don't want it, you know, real black either. Okay, so that should be good. Now I'm just going to paint this where I see the darkest areas. Almost dry brushing. Letting some of that gray underneath show through. Down the leg. Really not much of a puddle, so you have to have a lot in your brush. And down here. And then while I have this darker on my brush, I'm going to come right in here and paint this shadow under their back legs, back here. It just makes it look like it's connected to the straw and the shadows, all this in here. Get that over there. Now again, even shadows that move towards the light get lighter, so I want that a little bit lighter over there. And just soften this a little. Okay, back to our dark. Working this area around the belly. You notice I do a lot of wiping the brush off on the paper towel. Even when we get into oil painting, that paper towel is essential to help you with painting. And we use it all the time because what happens on your brush is the most important thing, whether you're oil painting or watercolor. So that paper towel is there helping your brush to do its job, so you really need it. Alright, so I didn't think we needed much darks on this side, even though when I look at the picture of the pigs, all the blacks look pretty much the same. You have to paint them by choosing not to make them all the same. So as you move towards the light, those blacks have to get lighter. So we'll give this ear over here just a little bit more form by making it a little darker inside, but we don't have to do much behind it. Okay, and the little spot. This side of the face is not getting the sunlight as much, so we're going to paint this a little bit darker here. Again, I'm still just sort of dry brushing it where it's drier. Okay. I just want to clean up these spots here a little bit more. Soften those. That's this piggy's back leg back here. All right. Okay, now coming over here, we'll get this one. And I'm just letting the dark wash sort of fade into the lighter gray behind it. So it's just sort of offsetting that, cleaning my brush off, allowing it to sort of go into the light. And down here on this side of this pig is going to be really dark because that's almost completely in enclosed shadow. And over here, again, letting this passage in here where the shoulders, letting that be a little bit lighter because the light might be hitting it a little bit more. Letting the brush show form that way. And down around here by the face. And then wiping my brush off, I'm just going to let some of this just define the jaw in there. Just a little bit up and through there. The head. Okay. Always allowing my marks, just like in drawing, to show the form. Okay, now I'm going to clean that off, and what I want to show you next is how I go about making it look like a pen and ink. Dan is going to be teaching us more about pen and inking in our last watercolor lesson, but I want to show you what I would do in this situation. So I'm going to take my tiniest tiny brush, and this is a cheap synthetic, but I like it because it's the size is 0 with 10 over the top, 10 over 0. So I'm going to make a nice dark ultramarine blue, burnt sienna. I hardly ever use black. And this can be as thick as you'd like. Just going to go in through here and do some of the eyes. I'm going to work on the eyes a little bit. I won't be talking much because it's hard to do this tiny work. And then I just left the white of the eye just being the white of the paper. All right, and while I have this here, I'm just going to accent some of these features on the nose and the area here that I really want to be defined. So I'm not going to draw all the way around the nose, but just in a few places where I felt that I needed a little bit stronger accent, like right under the nose there, a little bit of the mouth, some of these crinkles, just defining features. Okay, and maybe a little bit down this leg. And the ear. Okay. Now I get asked a lot of times with pen and inking, do you ink first and then watercolor over the top of it? Which I do not, because different inks have different properties and can do different things. So if you buy an ink that is water soluble and you didn't know it or whatever and you paint over it, you're going to have a disaster on your hand if you ink first. So I never ink first. I draw first and then I'll ink over the top. And actually what I do most days now is just use a brush. I don't even use hardly ever using the pen tip, but the pen tip creates a very unique quality and it's good to learn how to use it. So that's why we're including it in what we're doing. And the Victorians often did use the ink pen in their watercolors. So I think it's good to learn just because it's unique and very relaxing. I'm just kind of doing the legs a little bit here just to define some of these form features. A little bit under the belly. And I'm going to just kind of let the rest of that fade. All right, now this little pig. So getting this eye in. This one's very much more in shadow. So I'm going to do a very subtle contour of her face over here. And the accent around the nose. Just cleaning up some of the wrinkles around the face. And then this ear is pretty much lost to sunlight, so let's define that. Okay. That's too dark, but and then this ear. And we'll just separate that from the background a little bit more there. To give her some eyelashes. And I did want to separate her jaw from that shadow a little bit, just to define it. And then clean up this area here where the leg comes down. Now you do not have to do all of this tiny brushwork. I enjoy it and find that it helps bring some of this, some of these things that kind of get lost in the process of painting that I really liked, those little detailed features. And so I just want to bring some of those back. And that's why I do this. I'm going to very lightly, and I can mix an even lighter color wash here, just going to outline her back. Using the softest, lightest touch. And coming up, across. I think I'll do that to him too. Coming around this way. Straight down, angle in, and then out. Okay, now I'm just going to take a little bit of this and accent some of these straw pieces that I thought were nice. And see, the tinier the brush, the more often you have to go back and get paint. So you can see how often I'm going back. What I like about this though is, as you've seen here, some of my lines I can press down and get thick, and other ones, as you saw here, I can press very lightly and get a thinner line. So that's called ribboning a line, and I really like that. I find that more difficult to get with a pen tip. Okay. Now to finish up a watercolor painting, I always sign it with a pencil. You can sign it with a pen too, but this is how I do it. All right. And that wraps it up.